Okay, In Defense of Ska will begin in just a moment. But first, I just want to say thank you for listening to the podcast. It means so much to us. And if you enjoy the podcast, tell your friends about it. The best way to do that is to, follow us on Instagram and Twitter and share our posts and let people know when they say, hey, is there a podcast I should be listening to? Say yes, In Defense of Ska. Go on to wherever you get podcasts from and subscribe to the podcast. Leave a 5-star review. Let people know that you support In Defense of Ska, that you defend ska. Thanks.
Of all the things that brought punk culture to the mainstream, the Warped Tour was high on the list. Many bands played the traveling festival and broadened and expanded their audience in the process. The Warped Tour is commonly thought of as a punk festival, but ska was always a significant part of the programming, even after the 90s, when the genre was supposedly dead. Legacy bands like Less Than Jake and Real Big Fish regularly played the festival, but so did new bands like Westbound Train. Today we speak to Warped Tour organizer Kevin Lyman and discuss his personal ska roots and understand the role ska played with Warped Tour year after year.
Aaron, did you ever go to Warped Tour?
I did not.
I went to Warped Tour.
Oh, yeah?
A couple times, yeah. I never paid to go to Warped Tour, though.
Oh, wow. How'd you get in for free?
I'd get on the guest list from somebody or sneak in. Tons of people, though, went to Warped Tour. And I'd say for a lot of people younger than us, it's how they got into punk and ska and hardcore.
Yeah, I think Warped Tour was very, very influential for people that were the generation just under us.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people our age went in the 90s, but I mean, I think that like the late 90s and the 2000s and on, I think was just like almost like a rite of passage for people that were a teenager in those years.
Definitely. I think that it's kind of left a hole in a way, because it was such a good entry point for a lot of people to get into DIY culture. I kind of hope that something appears similar to Warped Tour for the next generation.
I think the other thing interesting about Warped Tour is that, it was kind of known as a punk festival, even though it was a little more diverse than that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was probably the closest thing to there being a ska festival, a touring ska festival in the 90s and 2000s, because really it's the only festival that consistently had at least like one or two, if not like 4 or 5 ska bands on it.
Yeah. So Warped Tour is a ska festival.
First thing I want to talk about is Jeff Rosenstock's band, Arrogant Sons of Bitches.
Mm-hmm.
From as I understand it, he played Warped Tour in the parking lot in 2003.
Yes. Yes, he did.
And unclear to me if it was a just sneak up and do it, or got permission, or yes, you can do it, but
let's just say it was not endorsed and not discouraged.
I love that.
That was kind of my term through all the bands. We always had a lot of bands who wanted to come out and follow the tour, maybe sell CDs in line. Then it got to the point where some people were kind of setting up a stage out front or driving by in a truck on a flatbed and playing for the line. And I was like, yeah, I never shut it down, but I never said, yes, it could happen, if that makes sense, because the venues would a lot of times freak out. I'd be like, it's totally cool. Like, I'm fine with it. I have no problem with it. Well, did you okay it? Well, no, it shows that they have a lot of gumption and they're willing to get out there and try new things. How can I not discourage that? That was the story of my life, trying new things. So yeah, I think that the stage he was playing with, I kind of loosely I gave the kid advice and probably slipped him $50 for gas money once in a while.
One of the members of the band, JT Tourette, he was in a band called Sprout, and I think they officially played Warped Tour in 2002.
They played, on the Ernie Ball stage, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So he told me that he asked you about it, and you said, let me see if I can get that quote. Yes, but you didn't hear it from me.
Yeah, that was pretty much the story. That was pretty much the story of the 22 years of trying to bend the rules a little bit, because, there was permits and there was venue rules, but, I knew what we could probably push and get away with. So
mm-hmm.
I I understood what they were doing, these young people out with new bands, that it was hard. It's hard as a new band finding gigs and finding fans. So, when I was hearing that bands were able to sell 100 CDs in a line at Warped Tour, or they made fans, or they made friends. I mean, there was a band I sometimes hear a great band in the parking lot and invite them to come play a barbecue. Or, up in Canada, that band was Ill Scarlet. They were playing out in the front of the line. I said, wait, you got to come play the barbecue tonight. And they're like, we have a gig down in Toronto. I said, cancel it. You're going to have much more fun at this barbecue, and you're going to meet other people. They ended up meeting a gentleman who ended up being their manager. And I think they, eventually had a pretty successful career for a while in Canada. And they did a couple Warped Tours with me.
Incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I think in Jeff's case too, they were on tour and shows, they had punk shows lined up and they were getting canceled. And so they were just like, what are we going to do? Oh, wait a minute. Warped Tour's around here. Let's just see if we can salvage some of our tour by piggybacking off of Warped Tour.
Yeah. And he's so talented that, he's going to make fans out there. And he was working, and they probably made enough gas money to at least to do the next city or work their way home or whatever they had to do, or between gigs. So it was always a fun part of the Warped Tour. There was other bands who did it and eventually played on the main stage, including Mayday Parade.
Mm-hmm. They started in the parking lot?
Yeah, they started in the parking lot.
Wow. So at the same time that this is happening, somebody's making a movie called Punk Rock Holocaust. I know Jeff and some of those people were had cameos. I think you were in it. I don't know if you had a major role or not.
That one was fully endorsed by me. But we did bend all the rules again on getting it done, because it was a Doug Sackman who worked for like Trauma Films. And they do all those like super, like, not even B movies, like D movies, those.
Yeah, like Purposely Bad.
Yeah. And they said, oh, wouldn't it be great to have this like theme of the Warped Tour, and we do a murder slasher film on the Warped Tour. I was like, sure, why not? And they came around with and really they were writing the movie as they went. I'd like to say writing the movie. It was more like, okay, we got one band that's willing to be killed. Okay, so band gets killed, and then all of a sudden it was like every band wanted to be killed in this movie.
Sure, yeah.
So they were kind of sitting with Doug, who's a fantastic person. He's doing very well in the world right now, doing like more traditional films and TV. But he was out there, and there'd be this guy skateboarding around with a machete and bandana. I don't know if this would go over too well right now, but a machete and a skateboard, and then he would, slice a band open or kill them on stage, and they got killed by like drum stands, like a cymbal stand going through the heart, or it was like ongoing. And then it got to this point where we needed crowd scenes, so he could reach out on the internet to this following he had for these movies and say, if you're going to be at the Warped Tour, be there at 11 o'clock, an hour before doors. We're going to bring in and film you some murder scenes. And of course, we wouldn't tell the venue. And then the morning of, I'd go, hey, we're going to do something here. And then we'd bring all these people in and cover them in blood. And then they needed more of a crowd scene. So while a band was playing on one stage, they would be like doing this murder scene on the stage while people were waiting up next to it. It was pretty funny. But it really scared a few people a few times, because blood would be squirting out of their neck, and one security guard didn't get the message or something, and the reactions. So, it got down to I think the final part of it was there was two bands left, and most of the people were killed. So it was the Used and Simple Plan. So the band became Simply Used.
Did you play yourself, or did you play a character?
I played myself, and I was covering up the murders and denying them because we had to keep our sponsors happy.
I've read about it, but I have not been able to find it online.
It was on YouTube for a while, I think.
Oh, was it? Okay.
I mean, it's been translated. Like, talk to Doug, and he's like, oh, it's been translated into like 8. We did like Punk Rock Holocaust 2, and then we did... He's got like Punk Rock Holocaust 3 in the back, but we didn't, it was like we didn't go to the labels to get permission. We didn't go to the managers to get permission. We didn't get the agents involved. It was like the bands, and then the bands got so serious, like, you have to kill us. And then a band that wasn't even on tour, Pennywise, and you can't say no to Pennywise, was like, you better come kill us. We want to be in the movie. So they had to go kill them when they were actually playing, I think, the Trocadero in Philadelphia or something. They had to go down with the film crew. That's where they're based, and kill the band so they could be part of the movie.
I see. So, Kevin, you're obviously Warped Tour has had a history of having ska be part of the festival pretty much the entire time the festival existed. Um,
Absolutely.
but your roots go back to the '80s, just as a ska fan, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I was probably some of the first music that I started to really appreciate was around '79. And that would be like the Clash and things such as that. And some of those bands from like around that period of time, I was starting to get turned on to. In the early '80s, and then as I transferred into putting on shows around 1982 myself while I was in college, those bands always included like Fishbone, included a band called the Targets, which was from out in the Pomona Valley, Chardon Square. There was always like this kind of element of mod ska kind of vibe that I really kind of enjoyed, and then gravitated towards Los Angeles. And that was bands like the Untouchables. And my
Hmm.
first gig ever was as a drum tech for basically the Untouchables. Outside of putting on my own shows and stuff, I faked being a drum tech, which the drummer realized in about 5 minutes I wasn't a drum tech. But they let me go on tour with them a little bit. I ended up doing merchandise and helping out in other ways. But yeah, it always has been ska. I still have an affinity for it and ska influenced music. So a lot of this stuff that's kind of this stuff that's kind of going on right now, and that's why you'd always find that kind of influence out on the tour. So the reggae ska, that's from my heart. So I always wanted to have something like that, and it was something to break up the day too. Like the sound was nice to have on a stage in the middle of the day or later in the day, kind of give people's ears like a change. And I think Scott, bands like Les and Jake, right up until the end of Warped Tour were saying they were amazed at how many people had never heard him before.
Mm.
The Untouchables on tech gig. Was there a reason why you said I'm a drum tech, even though you weren't a drum tech? Did you feel like that you could fake that?
I was working at a show. Oh, yeah, I thought I could fake it. That's the funny part. I thought so. I was working a show, and the Untouchables fired the drum tech, and they said, "We're going on the road in 2 days. We need a drum tech." I'm like, "I can do it." And I drove straight over to Guitar Center, and I went in, and I told the guy I needed to learn how to be a drum tech, and he goes, "Well, takes time." I go, "No, I need to know by tomorrow because I'm going out with the Untouchables," and they were a big band in LA at that point. And he laughed because Glenn Simmons was their drummer, and he was well known around LA as like a really good drummer. So he wasn't. So I went to the rehearsal studio, and I was so nervous touching the equipment. I was sweating. I was picking up one little piece at a time. He looked at me right away and goes, "You've never touched a drum kit in your life." I go, "Yeah, that's not quite true. I did it last night before I came here." He says, "Well, we've got no one else, so why don't you come? At least you can help me with the cases, and I'll try to show you what we'll get through it." And I got to go on a little bit of a tour with them, but never got to be their drum tech.
So you ended up doing more like merch stuff then, or just loaded?
I did merch, and then they fired the road manager, so I started helping being a road manager, like almost like 3 days into it or something.
What happened with the road manager? Why did they fire him?
Oh, they were always firing someone. Probably in those days, it was like, trust me, it was a lot as professional as things are now. And probably the road manager was drunker than the rest of the crew. So they decided they better get rid of him.
Okay.
Yeah, the history of Untouchables, I think they had 4 managers
Yeah.
through the course of the band. So
Yeah. Dave Lumian was their first one.
no, he was there. He was the third or fourth, and he was the one that kind of stayed with the band. But before that, it was so different people. But one of them was Ramon Estevez from the Charlie Sheen, Emilio Estevez
Oh,
family.
okay.
Yeah,
Probably short lived.
short lived. But I think that through him they got to play Charlie or not. I'm sorry, Martin Sheen's house in Malibu, like for birthday parties.
I mean, they had a really cool vibe, like getting to do Repo Man, being the band in Repo Man.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
They were like, they were like such a great band in LA, and they were well liked by that Hollywood crowd at that point. So
Yeah.
I think that led to that, that chance, and that was during the Dave Lumian time is when I kind of started. They'd already been around a few years by then. So
Yeah. He seemed like the manager that kind of understood them the best and kind of had the best idea how to work with them. I think some of the earlier ones didn't so much.
I think you're correct on that. Yeah.
Did you just do the one tour with them, or did you continue to?
Oh no, yeah. I like, they were like, great, Kevin, thanks. And then I was already starting to get really a firm hold on LA, being a promoter rep and working on shows. So, I didn't really want to go on the road. I'm not good at driving at night. So I'm useless. I was useless. I'd fall asleep. So I couldn't really drive the truck. So the guys were like, this guy's completely worthless on the road. And I went home and just started working, and I probably worked with a band like the Untouchables at that point. Once or twice a month, they were playing something I was doing in LA. So, my favorite, to get to hang out and at least do the shows with them then was great.
Did you get to go to the On Club?
Yes, went to the On Club. That was the place. That was the place where people wanted to get dressed up a little bit. To be honest, it was like, if you wanted to meet girls, go to the On Club.
Mm-hmm.
Or Odyssey. I think it was the Odyssey dance club in LA. There was a few dance clubs, but the On Club was like, it had a cool vibe. It just had a cool vibe.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. I mean, it's before my time, and I'm also from Northern California, but that's what it sounds like from everyone I've talked to.
What did it look like inside?
Oh my God! It was the stage was kind of small. Okay, it was fairly narrow and always dark. It was always dark in that club. Like, just lighting was not like a benefit, which probably made guys look like me more appealing to the girls. So it was just fun. It was just a cool vibe, and people were dancing and having a good time. But it wasn't like a big venue like the Palladium or the Palace or these kind of places that people were playing at that point. But then when that band grew later on, the Untouchables could headline some of those venues in LA.
Mm. Yeah,
but I think it was every Thursday night they were playing at the On Club they were like the house band.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was their very first show, because they started out as kids who went to the On Club, and they got to know Howard Parr, the guy who ran it, and they appealed to him. They said, "Can we bring our band?" And he said, "Sure. I like you guys as people. And that's how they got to develop as a band, was then the On Club.
Yeah, it was a nice period of time in LA.
So you told me before that the first show you ever booked was Fishbone.
Yeah, it really, it was on, outside. I had probably done a few things at school, but I rented a community hall in Claremont, California, where I lived. It was called Taylor Hall. And it was one of those things where it was like beer was included, and there was going to be 5 bands. And of course I got Fishbone to come out and play at the show, which was super cool. Fishbone was like my band. It was like, Fishbone, I can give you $100 couple. Sure, we'll be there. It was, and they came out and played that show, and the show was packed, and it was raining really hard, and the whole venue got just covered in mud because people were going out to smoke their cloves or whatever, and it was like it was like I felt bad because the kid who ran it, his name was, I remember his name, Tony Cisneros, was actually working as like the guy who's supposed to be it's just like a community center, and he was supposed to kind of clean up and make sure we didn't do anything, but he got too drunk and passed out in a broom closet, and we tried to clean up, but when you're trying to load out a show, and we left it kind of messy, and the next day they had a wedding come in, and they couldn't find Tony, and they found him passed out in the broom closet.
They found him as they were setting up for the wedding, still in the broom closet?
As they went in to close it, the doors were open, the wedding, nothing, and it was like, oh gosh, trust me, and I lived in Claremont, so it was like I was never allowed to do anything of that again.
Wow.
So you're kind of putting on shows, but then at what point do you move into it in a more professional capacity?
Well, I went out of college. I graduated, and I didn't know what I was going to do. As I guess a lot of people now. It's funny when my students come to me and go, "No." I go, "Well, I was kind of that same person, So I went over to Hawaii for a while and lived in Hawaii for a summer, and then I came back and I needed a job. Really, I didn't know what to do. I was going to run youth camps or do something with my degree, and someone said, "Hey, they need a stage manager at Fender's Ballroom in Long Beach. And you did pretty good in college." The sound company was like, "Kevin, this promoter needs help down there." And I said, "Sure. What's it paying?" And it was like $100 a night in cash. So I was, yeah, I'm in. and started working at Fender's Ballroom. And this promoter was called High Times Events, and they were doing like bands like Lone Justice, the Blasters, kind of that kind of Americana rockabilly kind of shows. And she was booking those shows, and also in that venue in Long Beach, Golden Voice was doing shows. And one time they co-promoted a show, and again, I remember it was Motorhead that they co-promoted. And at that point, Paul Tollett, who runs Golden Voice now and started Coachella, and me had gone to school together at Cal Poly. So it was really weird, this connection through Cal Poly Pomona. And they said, "Oh, Kevin, you want to handle production?" Because I think my qualifications at the point was I could actually read. And some of the people at the venues were more like, if you didn't like something, they'd beat you up. So I'd say I could read a contract. So I got, to run that show for Golden Voice, that co-promote with Marcel, and who was the promoter on the other end. And then Golden Voice was like, "Hey, we're starting to do more shows. Would you like to pick up some promoter rep duties for us?" And I'm like, "Sure." And that grew very quickly until I was doing shows for all the promoters in town at that point: Avalon Attractions, Golden Voice, Whoa Nelly, which was doing all the hair metal bands. I wanted to work every day of the week. I wasn't like, I'm only going to work in ska or I'm only going to work in punk. I wanted to work every day of the week. So I got a good reputation, and pretty soon I was doing over 300. I was doing 320 shows a year in Los Angeles.
Wow.
And that really allowed me to kind of get my chops, like understanding how everything worked. I learned how to do basic sound. I learned how to do basic lighting. I threw people off stages all night and set up dressing rooms. And, it was just, it was what we did. And eventually I got tired of throwing people all night. So I built some of the first barricades. I know people hate me for that, but, it was just kind of putting some safety around some of these shows and trying to run them as professional as possible, and also providing what bands needed to have a good show. Things were changing even in alternative punk rock, where there was writers attached to the contracts that they wanted certain things, and that was my job to provide them.
I don't know if you worked at Fender's Ballroom at the time, but in '87, there was a show where Bad Manners headlined and Fishbone opened.
Oh, yeah.
Were you at that show?
Oh, yeah.
This is a show that people in the ska scene talk about as this like sort of turning point in LA ska, where it felt like the scene in general was gaining momentum.
Yeah, that show, I think the capacity of the venue was probably about 1,500, 12 to 1,500. But I think, honestly, back then, the fire marshal rules, there wasn't really fire marshal rules as much. And that was one of those shows that if the only time it would sell out is when the box office window would fog up so much that they couldn't see out. That set the standard for a sellout. And then if someone got thrown out, someone would run around front and say, "One more ticket available." It was a wild place, which eventually the neighbors became. There was a gentleman that I think he was in his 80s who was really upset about this. And one time he got so pissed off, he firebombed the place. He threw a Molotov cocktail into the venue.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did that guy get, in trouble for that, or did?
I think probably he got a civic award from the city of Long Beach. But it was kind of the end of Fender's Ballroom as a big venue. It was really just basically a converted parking garage, or it should have been a parking garage. I don't know. It was a wild place because everyone shared one bathroom. There was one hallway that came out of this giant room, and then there was sub rooms around there, and everyone shared the bathroom. So it was like super intense because you would have these punk or ska shows or whatever we were doing in the big room. And then you would have all the longshoremen from Long Beach that were just in the little dingy bar. And then there was like other rooms which might have a quinceanera, or they'd be having a Filipino wedding. And then everyone would have to go to the bathroom together, and then everyone would just fight. Everyone would just be fighting all the time in there. Yeah, the hallway was kind of brutal.
Wow.
Going back a little bit, you talked about the Targets being like a local band, did some like mod pop stuff and some ska stuff. I was looking them up, and they went by the Targets, but they also went by Nicky Hart and the Targets. Do you remember that?
Yeah, Nicky was the singer.
Okay.
Yeah. Nikki was the singer. I'm glad you reminded. Well, as soon as you said the name, it was like, oh yeah, that was her name. Couldn't remember her name, the singer.
Were they kind of big locally? Because I hadn't really heard them before.
They were big, like in the Pomona Valley.
Yeah.
There was always a little scene going on out there,
Mm-hmm.
and she and kind of the leader of that kind of scene. I don't know if they really ever really broke out that much, but they were well loved around our community, around that whole Pomona Valley area.
And with Fishbone in those early days, I think I had read before that they would often sleep on your floor in those early days.
Oh, it'd be like I'd pay them literally like $100 to come to a gig, and then they would like leave, and they'd forget $100 in equipment and one of the band members.
We forgot a band member.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was like, and I'm like, okay, you can stay here. So it could be Angelo, it could have been Kendall, or I think it was Chris. Probably Chris Dowd was left behind at one point, and then they'd have to hang out until I drove into LA to do a show. There was no Uber to get them home. There was no so then it was usually just a night or two. But I was always working in LA, so I'm like, okay, just hang out here for a couple of days until I can get you back to LA.
How did they leave him behind?
It's the story of Fishbone's career. I think that they probably left him behind intentionally.
Oh, okay.
All right, so let's jump forward to Warped Tour. So you've been working with Golden Voice, and you have a lot of experience promoting, and so you decide you want to do your own festival.
Yeah, well, I was at this point. I was I doing pretty much any shows in LA. I was involved. If it was Golden Voice and some of these other promoters. And then in 1991, I was asked to be the stage manager of Lollapalooza. So fast forward from that time where that failed adventure with the Untouchables to 1991. So almost a decade went by before I was back on the road. I was invited to be the stage manager of the first Lollapalooza by Jane's Addiction. And at that point, we were kind of, Golden Voice was the company doing Nine Inch Nails and Stone Temple Pilots, or not, later on Stone Temple, but Susie and the Banshees and these bands. And they asked me to go as stage manager. So I returned to the road. Almost crashed and burned the first day because I was so used to working in the clubs where you did everything versus a large amphitheater where it's departmentalized. And I kind of exhausted myself. And a lot of the old crew people said, oh, there he goes, he's done. And I pulled myself up and went out and finished that and did that whole tour, and really observed a lot at that point of wow, how fantastic this was to be on this. But maybe one day I'll get a chance to do my own thing, and I'll maybe do something a little different. So that concept of scrambling the lineup was from watching Henry Rollins play to empty seats each afternoon. I would sit there and go, oh my God, he's so intense and so awesome. Wouldn't it be great if we could put him on right before Jane's Addiction one night?
Mm-hmm.
And what a change that would have been for him, because he would have blown everyone. He blew everyone off the stage, but a lot of people didn't see him. Like at a festival, if you play at the same time opening on a tour. And I said, so in the back of my mind, I was at that point going, well, that'd be cool to be able to mix up a lineup each day to give some people a chance to be later in the day. Some would play early. And then in 1995, I was really at that point where I was like, I don't want to be working in venues and clubs every night of the week for the rest of my life. I didn't want to become, I always call it that guy. You go to a venue and there's someone bumming your life out. You know that guy, right?
Yeah.
They just don't want to be there. And you're coming in and you're so stoked to see your favorite bands and your heart's excited, and your friends are excited, and then someone just bums you out. And I didn't want to become that. And I saw people starting to become that. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to go out and try something one last time for myself, because I had heard about the X Games coming, and I knew this lifestyle of skateboarding and music. I was doing things with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, where I'd put them on top of a skate ramp at the end of a skate contest and pay them $250. So we were blending sports and music already in Southern California. We were doing skateboarding events, and we'd have bands play, or snowboarding events for charity. And I just said, well, I'm going to go try to do this on my own before I work for someone else, and doing it. And that was, going out on the road, and that roots of kind of ska, led to No Doubt being on that first tour with us. I had a good relationship with them, and they came out for a while with us, Sublime coming out with us. But mixing it in with bands like L7 and Seaweed and Quicksand and Orange 9mm. So it was a super eclectic tour that first
Yeah.
year. And I also thought it was a good time to get bands, because I was working also in the clubs. And when we had a community, like if we had a half a pizza, you got half a pizza. If you needed a place to stay, you stayed on our floor of our house. And we had gotten to this point where it kind of had started to change, and a lot of these bands were starting to get signed to record deals. So they were getting guarantees in clubs versus a door deal. So you didn't have that same relationship. So we might draw 16 people one night, but the band was getting a guarantee versus a door deal. So I thought maybe, and I'd start talking to people. I go, in bands like Seaweed, I'd go, do you know the people in No Doubt? They're super cool, because I saw the fans would probably like to go to a show together if we could figure this out, because it was like they were separating into tribes. And I go, maybe you can bring the tribe back together. So that's what Warped Tour was set out to do.
So Sublime and No Doubt, they start to really gain momentum in 95, the same year that they played the first Warped Tour. But I imagine you began conversations with them before that. So they probably weren't very big when you started saying you should play my festival.
Well, that was a cool thing. I was doing a lot of shows with these bands around LA.
Mm-hmm.
No Doubt was playing lots of shows. So I kind of knew where they were at. I had the original Sublime demo tape, and I just kind of saw how they were connecting in California. And I go, wow, this is going to be a next scene of music. Plus, that first year, I didn't really start talking to the bands until March about doing it with us. And we went out, I think, August 1st of that first year.
Mm-hmm.
So it had to go to the people, your friends, and I'd done enough with Sublime where, either kept them out of trouble or kept their shows from deteriorating into complete chaos. I knew No Doubt. They were one of our favorite bands. Me and Paul would put them on a lot of shows, and I always enjoyed working with them, and kind of had this conversational rapport with the band. Every time they worked, I always wanted them to look good and play good. And, Gwen, immediately we recognized that she could be a star, like at any moment. And, I was really glad they came with me that first time.
Sublime has a reputation of being a band that you didn't know if you were going to get the best band in the world one night or the worst band in the world,
or the biggest train wreck. And sometimes that could happen. That could happen within a set. Start out super, super cool, and Brad would look at Bud wrong, or Eric. They would just look at each other wrong, and then it would just deteriorate into a shit show. And pretty much but that was also like what was so appealing about them too. But also when they were way on, there was no one with more talent and together than them at that point. And Brad Knoll, unfortunately we lost him. I always think about what he would have been doing. He had so much talent that was just starting to be tapped by himself.
Was this kind of idea about Sublime true before, when they weren't very known? Were they unpredictable like that, or was it as they were gaining popularity that they became more unpredictable?
No, that's who they were.
That's just who they were.
They were 100%. They were basically, little Long Beach hoodlums, basically. Families, they were kind of raising themselves amongst that scene. And that scene in Long Beach, was that whole coastal scene that, spawned those bands, like Hermosa Beach scene with Pennywise, Long Beach with Sublime. It was, TSOL came from that area. That they were running in a crowd that didn't really believe in any rules.
So I went through the first 6 years of Warped Tour. So we're talking 95 to 2000. And I just was made a list of the ska bands. A lot of ska bands in those first 5 years. And I really pretty much all the ones you'd imagined and more. I think 98 looked to me to be the most ska. You had the Specials, I think. Were they headlining?
We never really had a headliner on Warped.
But they were high placed.
They were very cool to have out. I wanted them, and that's a kind of band that I didn't. Those type of bands almost had to approach me, like weird that they wanted to do it, because they were at a certain level, and they would have to take a little bit of a step back, probably financially, to play Warped Tour. But they also understood that it was a great way to expose themselves to new fans.
Yeah, so Special. Let's see, 98. We have Aquabats. Hepcat.
Was Boston on then? Boston's on then? I don't
I
know.
think Boss Tones. And we have Mad Caddies. Yeah, Boss Tones. Pie Tasters. Real Big Fish. Rancid, not
Yeah.
technically ska, but they're
But always some Sky influences there.
Save Ferris, Ska Voovie and the Epitones, uh, and Voodoo Glow Skulls.
Oh wow, we were definitely Scott centric.
That's interesting because they're from a prior generation. Really, they're kind of doing their kind of comeback sort of thing, or their first real experience in the U.S. in the '90s was of being a big band because they weren't big in the U.S. in their own run.
Yeah. Well, that was a chance for them to come back and kind of reconnect, and also play with some of these younger bands that they were hearing about.
Mm-hmm.
They were they probably heard we had a bunch of ska, but I don't know when I actually booked them, the timing wise. But the ska community small and they talk. It was big, but it was like a small group of people that kind of were working and controlling it. And maybe all those people started talking about it, and it got back to them that, wow, they're really kind of have this really cool ska vibe going on Warped Tour. A band like the Specials would be like, okay, let's see if we can do something. And then, of course, contacting me, I'd be like, oh, that's one of my heroes.
Yeah.
Later on, it would bands like Joan Jett or the Buzzcocks or Billy Idol, or it would come back and play Warped Tour, and I'd be like, this is so cool for me to be able to bring some of these bands like the Damned played on Warped Tour. Like these bands are want to come play this thing that I created for younger bands and everything, but they want to come be part of it. And the Specials to me were great. If I remember, we had a lot of soccer players that time, and they were always out playing soccer with everyone, and it was just really always very cool. Unfortunately, Joe Strummer was scheduled to play the Warped Tour the year he passed away.
Oh wow.
It just confirmed him on Thanksgiving that he passed away in December. And I really think that would have been a cool summer to hang out with Joe Strummer.
Yeah, definitely.
I was reading the Specials biography called "You're Wondering Now," and there was a little talk about the Warped Tour, and it sounded to me like their closest connection was with Rancid. That they were friends with Rancid, and that they felt good about and comfortable like touring with them.
Yeah, I mean, Tim Armstrong is such a, with Op Ivy, but he's such a student of music
Mm-hmm.
that I'm sure just, they were like those. Sometimes I would bring those people out and they would be almost like fanboy out over the bands because they'd never worked with them, but then all of a sudden those bands were like, wait, you have a great repertoire of work too. Let's, and then start hanging out at barbecues. The next thing you know, they've got their tour buses parked next to each other. And, probably Tim Armstrong's forming a band with them.
Yeah.
A special project, but it was always fun for me because all these bands got to tour with people that they never had a chance to before, and later on you would see packages going out with Less Than Jake and Bowling for Soup and Aquabats on the same bill. They all respected each other as musicians and wanted to work with each other later on.
Was that kind of the coolest thing to you about the Warped Tour, like bringing together community and making those connections?
Yeah, absolutely. Warped was a community. It really was. I'm hoping that people could recapture that. But I think and not, I can reflect on it now, was my greatest skill set was that, okay, I'm going to put these bands together, but the rest of the community was so important.
Yeah.
Whether that was the nonprofits or giving people a chance to work or giving people a second chance so they can come work. And then finding, brands that would support us, to be able to put this tour out at a fair price and have those side stages and all those things that other tours and people don't have anymore. Even on festivals, you don't see like this local. We'd always have that local stage and then a lot of ska passed through that local stage,
Yeah.
And like you had bands that I'd run into like Stack Like Pancakes later on, and I just loved them. And I go, come play that stage for a week on the road, and then come back again. And there always just was some great bands out there, and then transferred to bands like the Slackers and Agro Lights, and they always had a little bit of that ska influence, maybe just not the horn section.
Yeah, I saw you at one point. You tweeted about Stack Like Pancakes, so you really like them a lot.
Oh yeah, fun. But you could only have so many horn sections on the road with you at one time because that's a lot of mouths to feed. I always had to balance it out with like making sure I had 303 that had two members
Right.
because a ska band would show up with 8 or 9, so kind of balance out to an average of 5.
Tell us about the barbecue. You kind of mentioned the barbecue before. Can you explain what it is?
Well, the barbecue was part of the how to build community, and we were out on the road, and a lot of sometimes these things would meta, you know, masticize from the something that was someone else was doing. So Lagwagon had this little barbecue. Carlos, their road manager, was a great barbecuer, but he had this exclusive pass to have his barbecue. So it'd be maybe No Effects and Pennywise or Rancid could have come to his little barbecue. And I said, you can't do that. Like, it's fine, but I need to make something inclusive. And I was also thinking of how do you make a place where the community gathers at the end of the night? Not so much the fan community that we just gave a 9-hour show to, but that community of people we're traveling with. Because by then, Warped Tour was traveling with a few hundred people. Eventually, almost 1,000 people would be on the road. So you all had a job to do each day, whatever you were doing out there. If you were with the smallest band and you sold merchandise to the production manager of the tour, to the accountants, but everyone was there. So this big city is going down the road, and that community gathered many evenings around a barbecue. It's the same thing I say around here. If everyone set a barbecue up in their front driveway, we'd probably have a better world out there. If you shared some barbecue with friends and you sat in your front yard, we saw that during the pandemic. Neighbors I put vegetables out for neighbors. People played music on their front porches. We were actually a real neighborhood for a while. Now, a lot of people are going back to their current earlier lives, but that's what it was. It was a place to gather. So your sponsors, your crew, everyone could come and meet people and say, oh, what do you do on this tour? Oh, I work for Vans. Oh, I'm in this band. Hey, why don't you come by and grab some shoes tomorrow? Or, hey, I love your music. Oh, wow, I'm with Ernie Ball. Hey, would you like to come by? We have some strings for you tomorrow. Or reverse, like bands would hang out and say, you know what, let's do a song tomorrow. We have that recording bus on the road. We have the John Lennon bus. Let's meet at the bus and do a song together. So you would have bands like Morgan Heritage and Flogging Molly recording in the bus, just doing amazing things.
Bands would sometimes exclusively play the barbecue, or they'd come in through that, and they would be involved with serving food too.
Yeah, we would have the barbecue band. That's kind of how they earn their right to be on the road.
Yeah.
And then, because you had this hot barbecue and we had to leave. So let's say it was 11 o'clock bus call, and that's when you get on the bus to go to the next city. Those buses have to leave at 11 o'clock. Now, the barbecue might go until 10:55, but everyone left, and there was this hot barbecue that you couldn't just leave there. So the barbecue band would be in charge of cooling down the barbecue, hooking it on their van, and driving to the next city. And they would get their 30-minute set that they would play like everyone else. But then after their set, they would have to go to Costco. I'd give them money, and they would go buy stuff for the following night. They'd come back and do the barbecue. So it was a kind of a working position on the road, but they also got their 30-minute set to kind of make fans.
Yes.
And they made, and the barbecue band was always one of the most popular bands on tour because they were cooking food in the evening for the other bands.
Sure, yeah. Now, there's a Canadian band called Boudin Soundclash. I'm not sure if I'm saying their name right.
Oh, Bedouin Soundclash, yeah.
Bedouin Soundclash. They started as a barbecue band, right? Too.
Yeah, they kind of came out, and they were like I think that by that point they weren't going to be a good barbecue band, but I loved them so much. I said, "You're like the co-barbecue band." We started in this world where it was co-barbecue bands, So one band would go shopping and one band would set up. But Bedouin Soundclash, I mean, they ended up going on to winning some Juno awards and things.
Yeah, really good band. They have some ska and reggae influences.
Oh yeah,
yeah, really big in Canada, but I think they also had some amount of audience here in the U.S.
Yeah, we put out their records on Side One Dummy Records, and that was, I was partners on that record label.
Let's see. So yeah, here's another interesting fact, and it may or may not be accurate because I got it from Wikipedia, so you can verify if it's true or not. But the band of any genre that played Warped Tour the most, I have as Less Than Jake with 15 of the 25 years.
Yeah, Less Than Jake played the most.
Yeah.
I remember, and I think we were over in Europe at the time when they passed one full year on Warped Tour. Like they played 356 352 days a year, So they played 352. When they crossed 1 year of Warped Tour dates, they made shirts for everyone.
Did you get a shirt, Kevin?
I got a shirt. I wish I could find that shirt. I can't find anything. I wish I had more of the stuff. People are like, "Do you have?" I go, "No, I gave it away." Oh no, I don't have that.
I mean, there's only so much room that you have for all that stuff, and I'm sure you were getting a lot of cool stuff.
I had a lot of nephews and nieces that would come over on the holidays, and I just put stuff out in a pile, and they would all go home with a pile of stuff.
You touched on this some, but there's been a lot of bands that have played in the 2000s and beyond that are, not big bands, but some cool ska bands. Like I'm going to just rattle off a few of them. So you had Aurea Ska band,
Oreska.
So yeah, thank you.
Which I was just talking about them the other day with a woman named Nadeshko, who came on the road with them from Japan.
Yeah, amazing band from Japan.
Oh yeah, I wanted to put out their records inside One Dummy. I wanted to manage them at one point in the U.S., but it just got really complicated with Sony Japan. That they would have broken in the U.S. That band would have been super popular in the U.S. if we could have got them back here to tour more on their own.
So you also had Westbound Train, another amazing, more traditional type ska band, has played Warped Tour.
Yeah, Westbound Train, just another band with great songs, great things. And like the Agro Lights, I would have Westbound Train play a barbecue. I would see a lot of the bands might not know Westbound Train, but if you put them in a barbecue, playing at the barbecue, all of a sudden, all these artists are like, holy crap, this is now my new favorite band.
I can see that.
I also see that you had Go Jimmy Go play. Were they on the tour or just a Hawaiian date?
They came on the tour with us.
Wow.
So Go Jimmy Go are from Hawaii, and they're more traditional oriented as well.
Yeah, we would, because I was also working, not when I was on Warped Tour, I was doing a lot of shows in Hawaii, and that's where I met them first, probably at Pink's Garage or the Cadillac, one of the clubs there.
And you've also had a Sonic Boom 6 on the tour.
Sonic Boom 6 from the UK.
Yeah, I love that band.
It's another band that I think they have some level of popularity in the UK. But what great people! I had a great summer hanging out with them.
Yeah, and then Layla, their singer, I think stage managed Sick of It All for the last Warped Tour.
Oh, I think she did. Yeah.
Do you remember a band called Tree Fort playing Warped Tour?
Oh yeah, Woodcore, Boston Woodcore.
No, they were from Atlanta.
Atlanta, Tree Fort,
and they were all kind of, from all the pictures, they were all getting naked and kissing each other and stuff.
Probably blocked that one out of my mind. I do remember the name, but I'm trying to remember. There was a band, Tree. I think it was just called Tree, out of Boston, and it was called like Boston Woodcore was their name, like they're talking Boston Woodcore. But yeah, Tree Fort. Tree Fort. Tree Fort was tied in with the guys who made the movie.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Oh really?
Yeah, Punk Rock Holocaust. That's why they were probably getting naked. Everything about them was always like over the top. But Tree Fort was their band. Like they were also in a band, the filmmakers. So of course everyone has a band, so I had to let them play. That was Tree Fort.
Nice.
I want to talk about the year 2005, and I want to kind of lead up to it with a conversation about how Warped Tour kind of was this thing that captured bands from scenes, whether it's the punk scene or the ska scene or whatever, and connected, sort of overlapped these scenes. So 2005 was your most financially successful year, right? The year you sold the most tickets.
Yeah.
And the reason, as I understand it, was because you had Fall Out Boy and My Chemical Romance at the peak of when they were breaking.
It was a little combo of a bunch of things, and it was almost too much because we also had The Offspring that year. We had All American Rejects, kind of more traditional Warped bands.
Mm-hmm.
We had Avenged Sevenfold was their kind of breaking starting point. We had, Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance, Hawthorne Heights. I mean, at one point I think we had, and it was all this timing where Total Request Live, if you remember TRL, was kind of a big deal on MTV. And they started to play these bands at the same time Warped Tour was going out. Like it was all the timing. So all of a sudden, our normal 500,000 crowd we ended up with like 280,000 people who just got off the couch for one day during the summer to go see a show because they'd been watching these bands on TV and promptly came out into a parking lot and passed out because they weren't ready to be outside. And, it was really a tricky summer because it wasn't our traditional hardcore crowd that could handle 9 hours in the sun and a festival setting. A lot of these people were coming to their first show. So it was like almost like these bands were crossing over to that radio kind of market and that radio crowd who really follows a band over one or two songs.
Right. Those bands, and I like both those bands. Patrick Stump's been on this podcast, and I like both of those bands write good songs, and they came from the scene. They weren't just manufactured bands, as some people kind of like to claim they were. But
not at all.
You had these bands like from the early days. Offspring and Green Day. These bands came from the scene, and they got very popular. Same with Less Than Jake and Real Big Fish. But I think I feel like your story about Warped Tour kind of exemplifies that the bands, the Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance, they were like scene bands that shot up to a whole new level of pop stardom.
They did. And it was this combo. So all of a sudden, something we worked hard to, and then all of a sudden it was like crossing over, I think even, pop radio maybe, but alternative radio was still very strong in America. You had the K-Rocks, you had, Q in Chicago, you had WHFS, you had all these stations that were just banging these songs like crazy during the summer. And then all of a sudden people saw, holy crap, I can go see them at the Warped Tour for, probably tickets at that point were $35,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go see this band. And I heard, and it was changing. One of the women, Kate, who ended up working with me after that summer, was selling merchandise for My Chemical Romance, and the numbers she was telling me, they were doing $30,000 to $60,000 a day in merchandise out on the Warped Tour.
Damn.
On that, and that adds up on a $20 T-shirt.
Yeah.
It was a pretty wild summer. I think I was just holding on for dear life and trying to just maintain and trying to keep people as safe as I could. We were developing almost like, in real time triage units for basically dealing with kids that were passing out because they weren't used to being in the sun, and how to get them back up on their feet and hydrating them. So we developed a lot of techniques during that tour that were used at later festivals and tours to keep fans safe.
The rest of the Warped Tour, excluding the final Warped Tour, which we'll talk about in a bit, you tried to continue to appeal to what was current and the scenes that were happening in that particular moment.
Right.
So my first question is, what were the scenes happening after this sort of Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance? I guess people call that emo. It's really more pop punk in my mind.
Yeah, and then it kind of went out like Day to Remember. Those kind of ones, we went to Pierce the Veil, Day to Remember, is that, Screamo.
So we went to Screamo. What happened after? What else was there?
Post-hardcore.
Metalcore.
Cookie Monster Rock.
Yeah.
But I always thought you bring all these people together and you bring the different sounds together and people will share fans, and then you kind of got into that moment at the time towards the end of Warped Tour, you were trying to, not, chase trends, but kind of get a feel for them. And a lot of people were like, oh man, Kevin, you should probably, bring mumble rap out and things. And I just like, no, this is it. I'm not bringing that out. It's crap.
The 2005 was your personal peak year with the festival. Do you think that was the peak for scene bands jumping into the pop realm?
Well, I think some of them, you had bands like 21 Pilots, and you had, Panic at the Disco that never just bypassed everything and played arenas, So there was a wave of those bands. But you don't, did Paramore ever cross over to the pop realm? But it was like kind of piecing that thing together, and that the whole goal every summer was to piece something together that added, 1 + 1 = 3, and go out and try to do 500,000 tickets each summer.
So Warped Tour gets this reputation of being the punk festival. I think that's kind of interesting because it's kind of eclectic.
Yeah, I kind of screwed up on that one, to be honest, probably in 1997. However, punk rock legitimized Warped Tour, I think, in the eyes of a lot of people, because when Pennywise and NoFX came, after that first year, no doubt Sublime, they blew up right after Warped Tour. That Warped Tour helped, like, to get exposure, and the labels got a lot of use out of that. But then we got known by NoFX and Pennywise. So in 1996 and then 97, we did a film called Punk Rock Summer Camp. So probably went with the punk rock name a little too much. But then again, I always felt that punk rock was in people's hearts, and everyone that was willing to go out on a tour like this and work as hard as they did had a little punk rock in them.
Sure.
Yeah.
But what would really make me happy some days was I'd be sitting there and I'd read some, you get those festival guides or someone sends you something. And quite a people would say was the Warped Tour was the most eclectic festival of the summer. And this is when we were being stacked up and compared to Lollapalooza or ACL or Coachella or some of the other touring festivals at that point. For people to say that made me feel good when someone else would recognize. I think the easy way for people was to discount Warped Tour just as, it's a punk rock festival. It's that punk rock festival.
Can you name a few bands that completely defy people's ideas of the punk rock festival Warped Tour that you've had?
Early on, Black Eyed Peas, the Deftones, Kid Rock, the Alcoholics, Ice-T, Eminem.
Mm-hmm.
Then later on, BB Rexa, Katy Perry, acts like that. Hot Shell Ray. These kind of bands that they were not, but they had punk in their hearts, that they were willing to get out there and work as hard as the other bands did, and get out there and earn their audience.
Yeah, I remember the year that you had Eminem. You also had Papa Roach and Weezer. I mean, pretty wild.
Yeah, Weezer came back. Weezer. There was a moment that at that point in time, really, River, from what everyone, and I was told, and even he didn't have confidence that anyone cared about Weezer.
Mm-hmm.
So they came back and played that first part of the tour, and the crowds loved him, and it rebuilt his confidence that they're still a relevant band. It's kind of crazy, right?
Definitely.
Kind of the same reason I think Green Day came back out on Warped Tour when they finally did Warped Tour. Papa Roach crossing over the metal. Actually, we were always kind of trying to mix it up. And Papa Roach, they were nice guys. Sure, you should come out on the road with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they came up playing with punk and ska bands too. So even though they play, nu metal, I don't think that really mattered to them.
No, I don't think so at all.
Did it seem more like then, kind of to my original question, that in a way Warped Tour really was more of like a scene band oriented festival with some exceptions?
No. I mean, I think it was reversed. We'd have definitely, we'd pay homage to the past, but always looking to the future. And if that future was a certain scene of bands, they were definitely going to be represented at different times, maybe a little more heavily.
So the final year of Warped Tour is the only year that you decided to just sort of let go of quote unquote relevant bands and just sort of play bands from the past that you liked and just keep it like that. Just let yourself be a retro festival, nostalgia fest.
Absolutely, yeah. We probably could have taken Warped Tour for another 4 or 5 years as a retro festival, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But sans a pandemic, which timing was pretty good in 2019 to say that was it. But yeah, in 2018, I go, you know what? I'm going out with friends. I'm going to go out with artists. I'm not going to have any problems on the road this summer. I'm going to have it, I'm going to know everyone that's out with me, and we're going to go one lap around the country and say thank you to those who come out. And we had a massive summer. We had a big summer. It was our second biggest summer of the ever.
Mm-hmm.
And then we ended in, it was a great way to wrap up. Do that great tour in 2018 with your friends. Do those the 2 shows, Atlantic City and San Francisco in 2019. We did a show at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when our exhibit opened. And, button it up and then get ready for the pandemic. I guess I had good timing in my life.
Great timing.
Yeah. So after 25 years, just kind of put a nice bow on it. And, hey, there's discussions, there's things. I'm doing this charity show up in Vegas, kind of tied in with the Warp philosophy that's tied into around that When We Were Young festival. I'm doing our bowling tournament that we used to do for charity and the Strange 90s show. So, I'm not going away, but I just don't know if there's a point or time, or if you could do something like Warped Tour, especially with the economics these days.
All that gas.
All the gas, yeah. all the gas, all the insurance, everything else.
You end up kind of being associated with Warp Tour. Um, I'm curious about, was that intentional to be sort of the face of Warp Tour?
No, it was not at first. At first, I was going to be like, "Hey, I'm the guy who loaded your trucks and vans, and I've got a good idea." I think, you know. But you learn that if you really believe in something, you're going to talk about it. You're going to be the one because what I did was Blink 182 couldn't afford a bus when they came out with us in like '97, and I
Hmm.
said, well, "Okay, you could ride on the floor of my bus." Or we had bunks for him. At first, it was floor. We got him a bunk, and then, but I'll need you to talk to the press about Warped Tour because it's this thing's starting to go. I want someone that can talk about it. And then I realized they wanted to talk about their new album coming out. They needed to talk about what they were all about. And that's where I said, you know what? I'm going to step out and say, this is, even though the bands knew I was behind it. And I think that's why I got bands like, to play it early on, 95 and 96, especially 96, with Pennywise and NoFX, knowing me from working in the venues. But I was at that point, if I really want, I have to talk about it as passionately as the one who started and believed in it. And,
Yeah.
I learned how to, be more of a front out front, but I was still always there to load the trucks, So, and I think that's why I was out at a festival this week, and all my old crew was there, and they were saying, "Kevin, when are we going to get together?" And I go, "I couldn't afford you guys anymore." And they go, "We don't care. We'd love to all get together and do this again if we could."
Oh man.
Yeah.
Which makes you feel pretty good that they remember that period of their lives as being something important.
You've done a lot of like stuff, in the last few years. Like I think you've done some podcasting about Warp Tour, and you kind of I feel like you're kind of assessing your legacy with it, I guess you could say.
I think in some ways you do. You start to reflect back, but I use a lot of those things that I'm reflecting on in my classroom settings, where I pull some of those lessons I've learned. I pull back some of those early reflections that don't really make sense until you can have a moment to sit there and think about them. And I'm trying to hopefully set up some of my students for um, that creative but successful business, so you can do good and do good business. So that's really the philosophy I teach in school. And so far, it seems to be working. I have a lot of students out there that are getting jobs, and if they can go in the world, and my wife's like, "God, you really want all these kids to go in the music business? It was so hard." And I said, "Well, if they could take a little bit of the philosophy that I think we built through Warped and some of my other projects, then that'd be okay. That'd be okay."
Do you look back and have any regrets about anything related to Warp Tour?
Sometimes I let Warped Tour become the priority versus some family things,
Hmm.
but we worked through that. And then, being able to tour with my daughters, they got to tour with me when they hit 14, 15 years old. They came out and worked on the tour, and they learned how to work real hard. They both worked really hard. They didn't skate on anything. They had jobs out there, and they really impressed people with their work ethic. And I see that to this day. My daughter is day-to-day manager for Avril Lavigne, and she's right now running around this morning getting ready for the Hollywood Walk of Fame star that's opening this in a couple of hours here, or it's probably open right now. I think it started at 11:45. And my other daughter, picked up. She's environmentally conscious and everything, and went to school for science, and is an environmental specialist for a large corporation as her first job out of college. And she's taking maybe some of that environmental stuff that maybe she was influenced by that we were trying to do on tour. So, you look back and the regrets, you can't really have them when you did something that lasted 25 years.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, running a festival probably so massively difficult and complicated. I am.
Yeah, you look at hey, there's some mistake. You had to make decisions, and some of those decisions you had to make very quickly or on the spot. And then maybe later on, you looked at me and go, well, okay, maybe I could have handled that a little different. But you had to live and die by your decisions. When you're going to be managing that many people, 800, 900 people on the road, and then you're going to, come across 500,000 people that are asking you to keep them safe and give them a good time. Um, you have to make some decisions that were not very popular,
Hmm.
but you had to make them on the spot. And then you sit here later on. Now you're talking towards, like I always say, I'm never going to run out of things to do. You just run out of time in life. You look back and go, well, maybe I could have, like, if I had the knowledge I had, if I had the knowledge I had 15, 20 years later, could we have saved Brad Knoll's life?
Mm.
That's why I worked with people like Music Cares, and that's why I was on the board of Music Cares, so I could learn and maybe help the next Brad Knoll make it through a hard time.
Yeah.
But at this point, you have critics in life, you have people that say you suck. But I go, you know what? Come stack up your life next to mine someday, and if you really, and show me, and it's fine. It's not like a challenge, but it's like, go out and then, stack it up. If you're going to complain, do it better. It goes back to 97. I always told someone, I said, someone's going to be sitting in a garage in 1997. I did that punk rock Holocaust movie, or not, punk rock summer camp. And I said, someone's kid's in a garage right now thinking how he's going to kick Kevin Lyman's ass and do it better. Maybe someone did, but I don't know if anyone ever did for a scene of music that I was part of and very proud of being part of.
So in 2015, you tweeted, "Ska makes generations come together." Do you remember making that tweet?
Oh, probably. That sounds like an emo moment. Jesus.
I'm just I'm just kind of curious if there was anything, if you remember what inspired that tweet.
I might have been at a show. Probably I was at a show or watching a band, and I just said I was watching young people getting turned on to ska and like their parents having a great time.
Yeah.
I would see that. I know, that during, and I don't know the exact band, whether it's Big D and the Kids Table or Less Than Jake or any of these bands, I would see the generations having a great time watching ska.
Oh, you just reminded me of a question I was going to ask you. I don't remember who said it, but I heard that you told Side One Dummy that if you do not sign Big D, that they're dumb.
Probably.
But you were a fan and you were very impressed with them. But prior to them signing on Side One Dummies,
I was impressed with Dave as a person, as also as a musician, and also as just the vibe of Dave McBain and the band, and like they needed a home, so we should be that home. We did put out a Boss Tones record for them at one point when they weren't getting that radio play. Boss Tones were rare. I got this summer we were camping, and Dickie's living out in the middle of nowhere, and he came over and we sat around and barbecued at the campground and just caught up, and yeah, we were cool. We were a cool home for those bands when they needed a little support. I like that.
The Big D. The thing about Dave McWayne and Big D was that they kind of came out after ska had that mainstream moment, so they weren't able to be part of that. But they were I don't know if it was he or they, but very determined. Like I know he told me that he mailed Fat Records every single record they ever did, hoping that one day they would release one of their records. Never did. But, he was that kind of person with his band.
Oh, nonstop. And with the videos they filmed, Little Bitch and all the stuff they would do.
Oh, yeah. So that was on Warped Tour.
Oh, yeah. We filmed a ton of those on Warped Tour. Probably some of my moments that you wish you could scrub from the internet sometimes.
Why would you want to scrub that?
Maybe my daughters have grandchildren. They can play the video of the old crazy grandpa on tour. So, those were like those moments, like you picked your moments on the road, like when you kept your punk rock credibility. Normally times I'd have to work or I was tired towards the end, but whenever he'd break out that camera, I'd have to do like pour beer on my head and jump on a table and break it or do something, So just wanted to be, it was that moment. And then everyone would be like, hey, that's cool. Kevin's part of the crew. Then I'd go back and put something like wound on my shoulder and some ice or go to bed, but you pick those moments that when you as it got later on and I needed to focus on putting on that show each day. I didn't have the extra energy for the party at night.
I've seen a few of those videos, and the funniest one to me is there's one where you just see Guar in full Guar outfit part of it.
Oh yeah, everyone. It's like being in the horror movie. You had to be in a Big D video by the end of the summer.
Thank you so much for listening to In Defense of Ska. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you normally stream or download episodes. If you haven't already, grab a copy of my book, In Defense of Ska, available at clashbooks.com. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. It's at In Defense of Ska. And please consider joining our Patreon at patreon.com/In Defense of Ska. You will get monthly bonus episodes, extended interviews and commentary per episode, and access to the In Defense of Ska Discord. In Defense of Ska would not be possible without the great team that tirelessly works on it every week. So you should go check out their other projects as well. Co-host Adam Davis has an amazing band called Omnigon. Give them a follow on Instagram and Twitter. It's simply @Omnigon. And our editor, Chris Reeves, has a phenomenal record label and podcast called Ska Punk International. For more information, go to skapunkinternational.com. And if you've ever enjoyed one of the highly specific In Defense of Ska memes floating around the interwebs, it was likely the work of The Bands I Like Only Charge $18. Find them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And on that note, we leave you by saying, Ska now more than ever.
So much ska at Warped Tour. The ska festival, the most ska of all festivals.
Now there's more content to listen to. This week it's Adam and I talking. What are we talking about? You're going to have to sign up to the Patreon and find out.
Yeah, just head over to the Patreon. $5 gets you in behind the curtain. Come hang out with Aaron and I. We miss you. We want to hang out. You get access to the Discord. You get all of our back episodes of Behind the Curtain. So much. So please go get to it. Please. We're begging you.
And then let's make sure you subscribe and then listen to next week's episode. We have a great band called
Stop
what are they called,
the
Adam?
Presses.
Stop the Presses. All right.
The only question we didn't ask is how they got their band name.